For 2 weeks, the town of Cedar Springs lived in fear of one animal. They called him a devil dog. Dangerous, uncontrollable, vicious. But what a homeless man discovered one cold October night would shake this quiet Tennessee town to its core and prove that sometimes the things we fear most are the things we understand least. What happened in that park didn't just save one life. It revealed a truth that would leave an entire community speechless. But before I tell you what really happened in those dark woods behind the maintenance shed, I need to know something. Where are you watching this from right now? Are you somewhere safe, somewhere warm? Drop your country or city in the comments below because this story matters everywhere, and I want to know this message of hope is reaching people around the world. And if you believe that real stories like this one, stories that restore faith in both animals and humanity, deserve to be heard, then do me a favor. Hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story that'll remind you why compassion matters. And share this video with someone who needs to remember that heroes come in the most unexpected forms. Trust me, by the end of this story, you'll want everyone you know to hear it. Now let me take you back to Cedar Springs, Tennessee. Mid-October. The kind of autumn morning where the air smells like wood smoke and fallen leaves, where the sun filters through the oak trees in golden shafts, and where families should feel safe taking their kids to the park. Cedar Springs Memorial Park had always been the heart of this small suburb just outside Nashville. It was where neighbors jogged at dawn, where retirees fed the ducks by the pond, where young mothers pushed strollers along the winding paths, and where high school sweethearts carved their initials into the old wooden benches. But for 14 days straight, that sense of safety had been shattered. It started on a Tuesday morning, October 10th. Sarah Mitchell was jogging her usual 5-mile loop along the trail that hugged the Willamette River. She had her earbuds in, listening to her favorite podcast, completely lost in her own world. That's when she heard it. A sound so guttural, so primal, that it cut straight through her music and froze her blood. She ripped out her earbuds and turned slowly. 30 feet away, half hidden beneath the shadow of the old rusted bench near the maintenance shed, was a dog. But this wasn't just any dog. This was a massive animal, easily 80 pounds, with matted dark fur caked in mud and something else Sarah didn't want to identify. Its eyes were pale, almost ghostly in the early morning light, and they locked onto her with an intensity that felt almost human. Almost intelligent. Almost like it was trying to tell her something. But Sarah didn't wait to find out what. She ran. By noon that same day, Cedar Springs Animal Control had received 17 calls. 17 different people reported the same thing. A large, aggressive dog lurking near the park. Snarling. Lunging. Blocking paths. Terrifying anyone who came close. Officer Dave Hernandez from Portland Animal Services arrived with his partner, Lisa Chun, both of them armed with tranquilizer guns and heavy-duty catch poles. They dealt with aggressive strays before. They'd handled everything from abandoned pit bulls to feral dog packs. But Dave told Lisa something that afternoon that stuck with her for weeks afterward. This was different. The dog wasn't just scared. It wasn't just hungry or confused or sick. It was guarding something. Every single person who called had reported the same bizarre detail. The dog never chased anyone. It never pursued. It only blocked. It only drove people away from one specific area. The maintenance shed on the east side of the park. But when Animal Control searched that area, they found nothing. Just an old wooden shed filled with rusty lawnmowers, bags of fertilizer, and broken park equipment. Nothing that would explain why a wild dog would stake a claim there. Nothing that made any sense at all. 2 days later, it happened again. Emily Torres was at the playground with her 6-year-old son, Jacob. He was giggling on the swings, his little legs pumping back and forth, when Emily heard the growl. She spun around and saw him. The dog. Ranger, though nobody knew his name yet. He was standing between her and Jacob, teeth bared, hackles raised, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. Emily screamed. She grabbed Jacob and ran to her car, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. She called 911 sobbing, convinced that if she'd moved 1 second slower, that dog would have attacked her child. But here's the thing. He didn't attack. He didn't bite. He didn't chase. He just stood there, watching them leave, then turned and walked back toward the shed. By the end of the first week, the local news had picked up the story. Dangerous dog terrorizes Nashville suburb. Authorities struggle to capture animal. Parents kept their kids home from the park. Joggers found new routes. The morning duck feeding crowd disappeared. Cedar Springs Memorial Park, once the pride of the community, became a ghost town. And still, Ranger evaded every trap, every net, every attempt to capture him. On day 12, things escalated. Sheriff Danny Briggs was doing a routine patrol when he spotted the dog near the pavilion. Danny had been a cop for 23 years. He'd faced down armed suspects, broken up bar fights, and talked jumpers off bridges. But when that dog charged his patrol car, slamming into the door with such force that the whole vehicle rocked, barking with a fury that sounded almost desperate, almost anguished, even Danny felt his hands shake. He radioed it in immediately. "This has gone too far," he told the dispatcher. "Someone's going to get hurt." That night, the Cedar Springs Town Council held an emergency meeting. The room was packed. Angry parents, worried retirees, business owners who'd seen foot traffic drop. And the decision was unanimous. Ranger had 48 hours. If animal control couldn't capture him safely by then, they'd have no choice. The dog would be put down. Nobody argued. Nobody objected. Everyone feared Ranger. Everyone except one man who had nothing left to lose and everything to see. Because that night, as the town slept and the park lay silent under a sliver of moon, Vincent Marshall sat on his usual bench on the east side of the park, the bench nobody went near anymore, and watched the shadows near the maintenance shed. And for the first time in 2 weeks, he saw something nobody else had bothered to look for. He saw the truth. Vincent Marshall hadn't always been invisible. There was a time, not that long ago, when people knew his name. When his voice carried weight. When he had a home with a front porch, a mailbox with his name on it, and a little girl who called him daddy and meant it with her whole heart. 5 years ago, Vinny had been a construction foreman for Hendricks Building Company, one of the most respected contractors in Middle Tennessee. He'd spent 15 years working his way up from day laborer to site manager, earning the respect of every man on his crew. He was the guy who showed up first and left last. The guy who knew every measurement by heart, who could read blueprints like sheet music, who never cut corners and never let his team cut corners either. He was proud of his work. Proud of the buildings that bore his sweat. Proud of the paycheck that let him provide for his wife, Lauren, and their 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Emma. God, just thinking her name still hurt. She had his dark curly hair and her mother's bright green eyes. She loved strawberry pancakes on Sunday mornings and insisted on wearing her pink rain boots even when it wasn't raining. She'd run to the door every evening when Vinny came home from work, throwing her arms around his legs and telling him about her day in one breathless, excited rush. He'd scoop her up, spin her around, and for those few moments, the world made perfect sense. But life has a cruel way of pulling the floor out from under you when you least expect it. It started when Hendricks Building Company lost their biggest contract to a cheaper competitor. Then another contract fell through. Then another. Within 6 months, the company declared bankruptcy. Vinny and 43 other men lost their jobs on the same cold February morning. He told himself it would be temporary. He had skills. He had experience. He'd find something else. But the recession had hit construction harder than almost any other industry. For every job opening, there were 200 applicants. Vinny sent out dozens of resumes. He showed up to hiring sites at dawn. He took odd jobs, day labor, anything he could find. But it wasn't enough. The mortgage payments piled up. The medical bills from Lauren's surgery the year before went to collections. The credit cards maxed out. And slowly, steadily, like watching a building collapse in slow motion, everything fell apart. Lauren left on a Thursday in June. She didn't blame him, she said. She just couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't watch the man she married disappear into someone hollowed out by failure and shame. She took Emma to live with her sister in Atlanta. Just temporarily, she promised. Just until you get back on your feet. Vinny lost the house 3 months later. He moved into his truck, then a motel, then a shelter. And eventually, when even the shelters felt too crowded, too loud, too full of people who reminded him of everything he'd lost, he drifted to Cedar Springs Memorial Park. It was quiet there. Peaceful. A person could disappear into the background and nobody bothered you. Nobody saw you. And that's exactly what Vinny wanted. To be invisible. To not be seen. Because being seen meant being pitted, and he couldn't stomach that. For 4 years, he'd lived on that bench on the east side of the park. The bench near the old maintenance shed. The bench that most people walked past without a second glance. He survived on food from St. Vincent, Delaware Paul Soup Kitchen, spare change from the occasional kind stranger, and the stubborn fading hope that maybe someday he'd find his way back to Emma. But hope is a fragile thing when you're invisible. That's why, when everyone else in Cedar Springs saw a dangerous animal that needed to be destroyed, Vinny saw something different. He saw a creature that everyone had given up on. A creature that everyone feared without understanding. A creature that was invisible in its own way, just like him. And on that cold October night, when the rest of the town slept and the 48-hour countdown ticked away, Vinny sat on his bench and watched Ranger with different eyes. It was just past midnight when the dog appeared from the shadows. But this time, something was wrong. Ranger wasn't pacing. He wasn't standing guard. He was limping. His gait was uneven, favoring his left hind leg, and even in the dim glow of the distant streetlights, Vinny could see the exhaustion in the way the dog moved. Ranger stopped about 20 feet away and looked directly at Vinny. Not with aggression. Not with the wild, defensive fury that everyone else had described. But with something that looked almost like recognition. Like he'd been waiting for Vinny to be there. Then Ranger did something that made Vinny's breath catch in his throat. The dog barked. Once. Twice. Sharp, deliberate sounds that cut through the silence of the empty park. Then Ranger turned his head toward the maintenance shed, glanced back at Vinny, and barked again. Vinny sat forward slowly, his heart beginning to pound. Ranger took 3 steps toward the shed, then stopped and looked back again. His meaning was unmistakable. Follow me. Every rational part of Vinny's brain screamed at him to stay put. This was the dog that had terrified an entire town. The dog that Animal Control had been trying to capture for 2 weeks. The dog that had 48 hours before he'd be hunted down and destroyed. But Vinny had learned something during his years of being invisible. He'd learned to see things that other people missed. And what he saw in Ranger's eyes wasn't rage or madness or danger. It was desperation. It was a plea for help. Vinny stood up slowly, his joints stiff from the cold and too many nights on a hard wooden bench. He reached into his backpack and pulled out his flashlight, the cheap dollar store kind with batteries that were probably half dead. He clicked it on. The beam flickered weakly but held. Ranger watched him, waiting. "All right, boy," Vinny whispered into the darkness. "I'm listening. Show me what you've been protecting." Ranger turned and walked toward the maintenance shed, his limp more pronounced now, his head low. Vinny followed, his footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. The autumn wind picked up, rustling through the oak trees overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. The shed door stood slightly ajar, just like it had been for weeks. Just like it had been every time Animal Control had searched it and found nothing. But Vinny had a feeling they hadn't looked hard enough. Ranger nosed the door open wider and disappeared into the darkness inside. Vinny hesitated at the threshold, his flashlight beam cutting through the blackness, illuminating old lawnmowers, bags of fertilizer, cobwebs thick as curtains. And then he smelled it. Something damp. Something metallic. Something that didn't belong. Vinny stepped inside, his pulse hammering in his ears. His flashlight swept across the interior of the shed, across rusted tools and broken equipment, until it landed on the back corner. That's when he saw it. The floorboards had been torn away. Splintered wood lay scattered around a crude opening in the ground, and beneath those boards was a tunnel, maybe 3 feet deep, shored up with old wooden beams and lined with torn blankets and what looked like pieces of cardboard. And inside that tunnel, barely visible in the weak beam of Vinny's dying flashlight, was something that made his blood turn to ice. A small, pale hand. For a long moment, Vinny couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't process what his flashlight was showing him. The hand was small, delicate, the fingers curled slightly inward. It belonged to a child. A child who was lying motionless in a makeshift tunnel beneath the floorboards of an abandoned maintenance shed in the middle of Cedar Springs Memorial Park. His flashlight flickered, the beam weakening, and panic shot through him. "No, no, no," he muttered, slapping the side of the flashlight until it steadied. He dropped to his knees, the cold concrete biting through his worn jeans, and leaned forward to get a better look. It was a boy. Maybe 6, maybe 7 years old. His face was pale, almost gray in the dim light, and streaked with dirt. His clothes were torn and filthy, a blue t-shirt with some kind of cartoon character on it that Vinny couldn't make out, jeans that were 3 sizes too thin for October weather. The child's chest rose and fell barely, each breath shallow and labored. He was alive. Barely, but alive. Ranger stood beside the boy, his body tense but no longer defensive. The dog lowered his massive head and gently licked the child's face, whining softly, a sound so heartbreaking that Vinny felt his throat tighten. "Oh my God," Vinny whispered. "How long have you been down here, kid?" The boy didn't respond. Didn't stir. His eyes were closed, his lips cracked and pale. Vinny reached out carefully, his hand shaking, and pressed 2 fingers against the boy's neck, searching for a pulse. It was there. Faint. Thready. But there. Hypothermia. Dehydration. Maybe a concussion. Maybe worse. Vinny had seen enough in his years working construction sites and living on the streets to know that this child was in serious trouble. Every second mattered. He fumbled in his coat pocket for his phone, the battered prepaid flip phone he kept for emergencies. The battery icon showed 1 bar. Maybe 2 minutes of talk time if he was lucky. His fingers were numb from the cold, clumsy as he flipped it open and dialed 911. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. Each ring felt like an eternity. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, and it cut through Vinny's panic like a lifeline. My name is Vincent Marshall, he said, his voice trembling. I'm at Cedar Springs Memorial Park, East Side, near the maintenance shed. I just found a child. A boy. He's unconscious, barely breathing. He's been here for I don't know how long. You need to send help right now. There was a brief pause on the other end. Sir, can you confirm you said a child? Yes, Vinny said urgently. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. He's in bad shape. Hypothermic. Please, you need to hurry. We're dispatching units now, sir. Stay on the line with me. Is the child breathing? Yes, but barely. His pulse is weak. Is he injured? Any visible wounds? Vinny swept the flashlight over the boy's body. There were bruises on his arms, a nasty cut on his forehead that had scabbed over, dirt caked under his fingernails. He's got some bruises, a cut on his head. He looks like he's been here for days. Okay, Mr. Marshall. Paramedics are 3 minutes out. Do not move the child. Keep him warm if you can. Do you have a blanket or jacket? Vinny looked down at his own coat, the threadbare winter jacket that was the only thing standing between him and the October cold. He didn't hesitate. He shrugged it off and carefully draped it over the boy's small body. Ranger watched him closely, his pale eyes tracking every movement. But the dog didn't growl, didn't threaten. He just stood guard, the way he'd apparently been doing for God only knew how long. I've got him covered, Vinny said into the phone. Please just hurry. They're almost there, sir. Stay with me. In the distance, Vinny heard the faint wail of sirens. They grew louder, closer, piercing the quiet night. Red and blue lights began to strobe through the trees, casting eerie flashing shadows across the shed walls. Ranger's ears perked up. His body tensed. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Easy boy, Vinny said softly, reaching out slowly toward the dog. They're here to help. It's okay. You did good. You kept him alive. Ranger looked at Vinny, then back at the boy, then at the approaching lights. The conflict was visible in every line of the dog's body. He didn't want to leave. Didn't want to let strangers near the child he'd been protecting. But something in Vinny's voice, some quiet certainty, seemed to reach him. Ranger sat down heavily, exhausted, his duty not abandoned but shared. Within seconds, the shed was flooded with people. Paramedics in navy blue uniforms rushed in with bags of equipment. Sheriff Danny Briggs appeared in the doorway, his face pale with shock. Officer Dave Hernandez from Animal Control stood behind him, his tranquilizer gun lowered, staring at the scene in disbelief. Jesus Christ, Danny breathed. Is that? It's a child, one of the paramedics said, already kneeling beside the boy, checking vitals, pulling out a thermal blanket. Male, approximately 6 to 7 years old, unresponsive, hypothermic, pulse is weak but present. We need to get him to Vanderbilt now. 2 more paramedics moved in with a backboard. They worked quickly, efficiently, stabilizing the boy's neck, carefully lifting him from the tunnel. Ranger stood up, agitated, whining, trying to follow. "Someone control that dog," one of the paramedics said sharply. "No," Vinny said, stepping between them and Ranger. "He's not dangerous. He's been keeping this kid alive." Dave Hernandez stared at Vinny, then at Ranger, then at the boy being loaded onto the stretcher. The pieces were falling into place in his mind, rearranging everything he thought he knew about the past 2 weeks. "He's been guarding him," Dave said quietly. "This whole time. That's why he wouldn't let anyone near. That's why he attacked anyone who got close," Danny added, his voice filled with something between awe and shame. "He wasn't being aggressive. He was being protective." The paramedics rushed the boy out of the shed toward the waiting ambulance. Ranger tried to follow, but Dave gently caught him by the scruff. The dog struggled, barking, desperate to stay with the child. "It's okay, buddy," Dave said softly. "We've got him now. You did your job." Vinny stood in the empty shed, his coat gone, the cold seeping into his bones, watching as the ambulance doors slammed shut and the vehicle screamed away into the night, sirens wailing. Sheriff Briggs turned to him, his face grave. "Mr. Marshall, I need you to tell me everything. How did you find him?" Vinny glanced at Ranger, who had finally stopped struggling and now sat beside Dave, trembling with exhaustion and fear. "The dog showed me," Vinny said simply. "He's been trying to tell everyone for 2 weeks. We just weren't listening." Danny pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Briggs. I need you to pull up all recent missing children reports for Middle Tennessee. I need photos sent to my phone immediately." There was a crackle of static. "Copy that, Sheriff. Stand by." 30 seconds later, Danny's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His face went white. "Oh my God," he whispered. "What?" Vinny asked. "Who is he?" Danny turned the phone around so Vinny could see. On the screen was a photo of a smiling little boy with bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin, wearing the same blue cartoon t-shirt that was now torn and filthy. Below the photo were the words, *missing, Caleb Jennings. Age 6. Last seen Radnor Lake State Park, October 1 st. Vinny's heart stopped. October 1st. That was 9 days ago, Danny finished, his voice barely above a whisper. And in that moment, as the weight of what had just happened settled over everyone standing in that cold, dark shed, one terrible question hung in the air. If this boy had been missing for 9 days, if his parents had been searching, if the FBI had been called in, if volunteers had combed the woods for miles in every direction, how had he ended up here, in a tunnel beneath a maintenance shed, miles away from where he disappeared? And what had happened to him in those 9 missing days that no one had been able to find him? The emergency room at Vanderbilt University Medical Center was a controlled chaos of beeping monitors, rushing nurses, and the sharp antiseptic smell that Vinny had always hated. He sat in the waiting area, still without his coat, shivering in a thin flannel shirt that did nothing against the hospital's air conditioning. Sheriff Danny Briggs had insisted he come along to give a full statement, but the truth was, Vinny couldn't have left even if he'd wanted to. He needed to know that the boy, that Caleb, was going to be okay. Across the waiting room, 2 people sat huddled together, clutching each other like they were the only solid things left in a world that had been spinning out of control for 9 days. Mark and Rachel Jennings. Caleb's parents. They'd arrived at the hospital 17 minutes after the ambulance, having broken every speed limit between their home in Franklin and downtown Nashville. Vinny had seen grief before. He'd seen it in the mirror every morning for 4 years. But the look on Rachel Jennings' face when the doctor had first come out, when he'd said those words, "Your son is alive," was something Vinny knew he'd remember for the rest of his life. She'd collapsed. Just completely folded in on herself as Mark caught her, and they'd both sobbed so hard that nurses had rushed over thinking something was wrong. But nothing was wrong. For the first time in 9 days, something was finally, impossibly right. Now, 2 hours later, Vinny watched as Dr. Patricia Okafor, the pediatric emergency medicine specialist, approached the Jennings with a tablet in her hands. Vinny couldn't hear what she was saying, but he could read body language well enough. Mark's hand tightened around Rachel's. Rachel brought her fingers to her mouth. They were nodding, crying, asking questions. Danny stood up and walked over, his boots squeaking on the linoleum floor. He spoke briefly with the doctor, then gestured for Vinny to join them. Vinny approached slowly, feeling suddenly out of place among these people with their clean clothes and their intact lives. But Rachel Jennings looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen, and something in her expression made him stop. "You're the one who found him," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Vinny nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Rachel stood up, walked over to him, and before Vinny could process what was happening, she wrapped her arms around him and held on tight. "Thank you," she whispered into his shoulder. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Vinny stood frozen, his arms awkwardly at his sides. He couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him. Couldn't remember the last time someone had touched him with anything other than disgust or pity. His throat tightened and he carefully, gently, put his arms around this woman who was a complete stranger and yet, in this moment, felt like someone he'd known forever. "The dog," Vinny said quietly. "Ranger. He's the one who saved your son. I just listened." Mark Jennings stepped forward, his jaw tight with emotion. "We want to hear everything. Please. We need to understand what happened." Dr. Okafor gestured to a small consultation room off the main waiting area. They all filed in, the door closing behind them with a soft click. The doctor set her tablet on the table and took a breath. "Caleb is stable," she began, and Rachel's hand flew to her chest in relief. "He's suffering from moderate hypothermia, severe dehydration, and malnutrition. He has a concussion, likely from a fall, and several contusions consistent with blunt force trauma from that same fall. But he's going to recover. Physically, he's going to be okay." "Can we see him?" Rachel asked, her voice breaking. "Soon. We're warming him slowly and getting fluids into him. He's been drifting in and out of consciousness, but he's asking for you." Dr. Okafor paused. "He's also been asking for his dog." Danny leaned forward. "Doctor, has he been able to tell you anything about what happened? Where he's been?" Patricia nodded slowly. "Some. It's fragmented, and we need to be careful not to push him too hard given his head injury. But from what we've pieced together, Caleb wandered away from your family camping site at Radnor Lake 9 days ago. He told us he was chasing a rabbit." Rachel made a small pained sound. "They told him a dozen times not to wander off. A dozen times. He got disoriented in the woods," the doctor continued. "He fell into a drainage ravine, hit his head on the rocks. When he came to, he didn't know which direction the campsite was. He walked for what he thinks was hours, maybe longer. Eventually, he found himself near Cedar Springs Memorial Park. He was cold, scared, confused from the head injury. He saw the maintenance shed and crawled inside to hide." Mark's hands were shaking. "And that's where the dog found him." "That's where Ranger found him," Vinny said quietly. "Caleb must have been in that shed for days before I even knew there was a dog in the park. Ranger wasn't keeping people away from some territory. He was keeping them away from a scared, injured child who was too weak to call for help." Dr. Okafor pulled up something on her tablet and turned it toward them. It was a photo of Caleb's arm, showing what looked like shallow scratches. "These marks are consistent with a dog's teeth, but they're superficial. Not defensive wounds. Not aggressive." "What are they?" Rachel asked, confused. "Based on Caleb's account, Ranger was dragging him," the doctor explained. "He told us the dog would grab his sleeve or his pant leg and pull him deeper into the tunnel whenever he heard people approaching. The dog was hiding him, protecting him." The room fell silent as the weight of that settled over everyone. "Caleb also said the dog would leave sometimes," Patricia continued, "and come back with food. Scraps from trash cans, half-eaten sandwiches, things like that. He dropped them in front of Caleb. The dog was feeding him." Vinny felt something break open in his chest. All those people who'd called animal control. All those complaints about an aggressive, dangerous animal. And the entire time, Ranger had been performing a miracle that none of them had been able to see. "There's something else," Danny said, pulling out his phone. "We ran the dog through our database. Ranger's microchipped. He has an owner." Mark blinked. "What?" "His name is actually Scout," Danny said, reading from his screen. "He belonged to a military family. Captain Andrew Chun. The family was transferred overseas 18 months ago. They left Scout with Rachel's sister temporarily, but there was some kind of miscommunication and Scout got out. He's been on the streets for over a year. Vinny thought about that. A year alone. A year of surviving. A year of being invisible, just like Vinny himself. And yet when Ranger had found a child who needed him, he'd done what no human had managed to do. He'd stayed. He'd protected. He'd kept that little boy alive against impossible odds. Where is the dog now? Mark asked. Animal control has him, Danny said. We had to take him in for observation and quarantine protocol, but... We want him, Rachel interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce and certain. That dog saved our son's life. We want to adopt him. Mark nodded immediately. Absolutely. Whatever it takes. Danny smiled for the first time all night. I think that can be arranged. 2 hours later, Vinny was finally allowed to leave. He'd given his full statement, answered every question, and now he stood outside the hospital's main entrance, the night air cold against his skin. He still didn't have his coat. It had been bagged as evidence, covered in dirt and debris from the shed. A voice called out behind him. Mr. Marshall. Wait. Vinny turned to see Mark Jennings jogging toward him, slightly out of breath. I wanted to catch you before you left, Mark said. My wife and I, we were talking and we wanted to ask you something. Vinny waited, confused. You don't have a place to stay, do you? Mark asked gently. Vinny's pride flared up automatically. I manage just fine. I'm sure you do, Mark said. But you just saved my son's life. And I looked into your eyes back there and I saw someone who understands what it means to lose everything. He paused. I own a construction company. Jennings and Associates. We're always looking for experienced foremen. Vinny's heart stopped. I don't. I know who you are, Mark said quietly. Sheriff Briggs told me. Vincent Marshall. 15 years at Hendricks. One of the best in the business before it went under. He pulled out a business card and pressed it into Vinny's hand. Come by Monday morning. Let's talk. Vinny stared at the card, unable to speak. Mark started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and one more thing. My wife wanted me to ask you something. When we bring Ranger home, when we introduce him to Caleb properly, would you be there? She thinks it would mean something. To both of them. Vinny looked up, his vision blurring. Yeah, he managed. I'd like that. Mark smiled and headed back inside. Vinny stood alone in the cold night, holding a business card that felt heavier than it should, and for the first time in 4 years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. But as he turned to walk back toward the park, toward the bench that had been his home, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The battery was nearly dead, but there was one new text message from a number he didn't recognize. He opened it, and what he read made his blood run cold. Asterisk, you found the boy. Good. But you also found something you weren't supposed to see. Stay quiet, stay invisible, or you'll disappear just like he almost did. Asterisk. Vinny stared at the text message, his thumb hovering over the screen as his mind raced. You found something you weren't supposed to see. The words felt like ice water in his veins. He read it again, then a third time, trying to make sense of what it meant. What had he found besides Caleb? What had he seen that someone wanted kept secret? His phone battery died before he could respond, the screen going black in his hand. He stood outside Vanderbilt Medical Center, the cold October wind cutting through his thin shirt, and for a moment considered going back inside. Showing the message to Sheriff Briggs. Asking for help. But old habits die hard, and Vinny had spent 4 years learning that people like him didn't get help. They got suspicion. They got blame. They got overlooked. So instead, he walked. Back toward Cedar Springs Memorial Park. Back toward the bench that had been his home. His mind churned the entire way, replaying everything that had happened in that shed. The tunnel. The torn floorboards. Caleb's pale face. Ranger's desperate eyes. What had he missed? It was nearly 3 in the morning when Vinny reached the park. Yellow police tape still cordoned off the maintenance shed. A single patrol car sat in the parking lot, Officer Lisa Chen visible inside, keeping watch. Vinny stayed in the shadows, observing. After 20 minutes, Lisa got out to do a perimeter check. That's when Vinny saw it. Another car, parked in the far corner of the lot, lights off. Someone sitting in the driver's seat. Watching. Vinny's pulse quickened. He pulled out his dead phone uselessly, cursed under his breath, then made a decision. He stepped out of the shadows and walked directly toward the patrol car, waving his arms. Lisa spun around, hand going to her weapon, then relaxed when she recognized him. "Mr. Marshall? What are you doing here?" "There's someone watching the shed," Vinny said quickly, pointing toward the dark car. "Over there. They've been sitting there for 20 minutes. Lisa's demeanor changed instantly. She radioed it in, then approached the vehicle with Vinny behind her. As they got closer, the car's engine started. Lisa broke into a run, but the vehicle peeled out of the parking lot, tires squealing, disappearing into the night before she could get a plate number. "Damn it," Lisa hissed. She turned to Vinny. "Did you get a look at who it was?" Vinny shook his head. "Too dark. But I got a text message tonight. A threat. Telling me to stay quiet about what I found." Lisa's expression hardened. "You need to tell Sheriff Briggs. Right now." Within the hour, Vinny was back at the sheriff's station, his dead phone plugged into a charger, the threatening message pulled up on the screen. Danny Briggs sat across from him, along with 2 FBI agents who'd been working Caleb's disappearance. Agent Monica Torres and Agent James Park listened carefully as Vinny recounted everything. "Mr. Marshall," Agent Torres said, "when you found Caleb, did you notice anything else in that tunnel? Anything unusual besides the boy?" Vinny closed his eyes, forcing himself to remember. The torn blankets. The cardboard. The smell of damp earth and metal. And then something clicked. "There was a backpack," he said suddenly. "Shoved in the corner. I didn't think anything of it at the time because I was focused on Caleb." The 2 agents exchanged a look. "We need to search that shed again," Agent Park said. Now. By dawn, the maintenance shed had been completely dismantled. And what they found changed everything. Hidden beneath layers of dirt in that tunnel was a waterproof duffel bag containing $23,000 in cash, multiple fake IDs, and a burner phone with contacts linked to a human trafficking ring that had been operating throughout the Southeast for over 2 years. Caleb hadn't just wandered into that shed by accident. Someone had been using it as a drop site. And when Caleb stumbled inside, injured and disoriented, he became a witness to something that very dangerous people wanted kept hidden. Ranger had found the boy before the traffickers could return. And for 9 days, that dog had kept Caleb alive and hidden from people who would have made sure he disappeared forever. The threatening text to Vinny had come from someone in the organization who'd been watching, waiting for a chance to retrieve their money. But Vinny's discovery, and Ranger's protection, had blown their operation wide open. Within 72 hours, the FBI arrested 11 people connected to the ring. Caleb Jennings was placed in protective custody temporarily, but was never in danger again. The little boy who'd chased a rabbit and accidentally stumbled into a nightmare was safe. And Vinny Marshall, the invisible man on the bench, had helped dismantle a criminal enterprise simply by listening to a dog that everyone else had feared. 3 weeks later, on a sunny Saturday morning in November, Vinny stood in the backyard of the Jennings family home in Franklin, Tennessee. He was wearing new clothes, purchased with his first paycheck from Jennings and Associates Construction. Mark had been true to his word. Vinny had a job, a small apartment, and for the first time in 4 years, he had something else too. He had his daughter back. Emma had come to visit the previous weekend. She was 12 now, almost a teenager, but when she'd seen her father standing on the porch of his new apartment, clean-shaven and sober and whole, she'd run to him just like she used to when she was little. Lauren had cried. Vinny had cried. And they talked about what came next. Slowly. Carefully. But with hope. Now, Vinny watched as Caleb Jennings sat in the grass, his arms wrapped around Ranger's neck. The dog had been officially adopted by the family, cleared by animal control, and welcomed home as a hero. Caleb buried his face in Ranger's fur, whispering things that only the dog could hear. Ranger's tail wagged slowly, contentedly, his days of guarding and protecting finally able to rest. Rachel Jennings stood beside Vinny, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. "He asks about Ranger every night before bed," she said softly. "Wants to make sure he's still here. That he's safe." "That dog gave him more than just protection," Vinny said. "He gave him someone who didn't give up." Rachel looked at him. "You didn't give up either." Vinny watched Caleb laugh as Ranger licked his face, the sound of pure joy, pure innocence restored. "I just listened," Vinny said, "to a dog that everyone feared. And I saw what everyone else was too scared to see." Mark walked over with 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Vinny. "We're putting up a plaque at the park next month," he said, "in honor of what happened. The mayor's office wants to call it Ranger's Point." Vinny smiled. He'd like that. If dogs could understand things like that, I think he'd be proud. 6 months later, Cedar Springs Memorial Park unveiled the plaque near the East Side Playground, right where Vinny's bench used to sit. It read, "In honor of Ranger, a guardian who never gave up. And Vincent Marshall, the man who saw what others didn't. Sometimes the ones the world ignores are the ones who see what really matters." Ranger lived out the rest of his days with the Jennings family, celebrated not as the devil dog of Cedar Springs, but as the hero he'd always been. Caleb grew up with Ranger by his side, the bond between boy and dog unbreakable, forged in those 9 dark days when they'd had only each other. And Vinny? He rebuilt his life one day at a time. He worked hard. He saw Emma every other weekend, then every weekend, and eventually, she came back to live with him. He never forgot what it felt like to be invisible. And because of that, he made it his mission to see the people others walked past. To listen when others turned away. Because that night in Cedar Springs Memorial Park had taught him something that changed everything. Sometimes saving one life means saving your own. And sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply paying attention to the things everyone else fears. If this story touched your heart, I need you to do something for me right now. Join our community of people who believe that kindness matters, that second chances are real, and that the invisible among us deserve to be seen. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another amazing story that restores faith in humanity, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes come in the most unexpected forms. And tell me in the comments, what part of this story hit you the hardest? Was it Ranger's loyalty? Vinny's redemption? Or the reminder that sometimes we all need someone to see us when the world looks away? Drop your thoughts below. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, the world needs more people willing to see what others don't. Be that person.